You don't have to look at your analytics at all. But the really key thing that you, the business owner, have to do is you have to know what you want to be going on with your website. Whatever your website is designed to do, you want to really understand that, because then we can say, great, and is it doing it? If we don't understand what it's trying to do in the first place, then we can't ever answer that question. And there's absolutely no point in just looking at numbers for the sake of looking at the numbers, because it's not going to tell you anything.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Scale Smart, Grow Fast podcast. Now, your website is speaking to you. Most leaders just don't know how to listen. In this episode, Philippa Gamse, digital strategy veteran and author of Website Wealth, a business leader's guide for driving real value from your analytics, shares how decision makers can use web analytics to uncover hidden opportunities, eliminate waste, and make smarter business moves. With over 25 years of experience consulting on high-performing websites around the world, Philippa offers some simple, jargon-free strategies that turn data into actionable insights and growth. Philippa, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Yes. Hi, Harley. I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Now, tell us a little bit more about your background. How did you get into doing website analytics?
Well, of course, unfortunately, this tells you that I've been around a little while, but I've been using the web for a long time. And before Google Analytics, I actually had a friend where I live in Santa Cruz who made a very early analytics program that was just fantastic. It was called ClickTracks. And it was a friend of mine here who actually happened to be a Brit as well, living in Santa Cruz. And it was the most intuitive, easy to use, kind of graphically helpful program that helped small businesses understand what was going on with their websites. And it was brilliant. And I loved it. And I got involved and I loved analytics and I loved the whole concept. And then Google came along and created Google Analytics, which was free. And of course, my friend's program wasn't free because he had to make some money. And so that, of course, that was unfortunately the end of that. He went on and did all sorts of other things and did great. So he's fine. But I was hooked on the analytics bit. So that's where it started.
Awesome. And you've been in digital strategy and analytics for a long time, as you mentioned. How's your approach to web analytics evolved? And why would you say it's more relevant than ever for leaders today?
I think because of the power of how you can program it. I mean, it used to tell us sort of fairly basic stuff like how many people come to your website and, things that people obsess about, like what's your bounce rate, which means how many people leave immediately. But now we can actually get much more deeply into kind of users' behavior. Now we can do things like look at screen recordings that show us how users move about on the page. We can figure out how much of a video people watch, right? And all of these things are actually quite important. And before your users freak out, analytics is very much supposed to be anonymous. So it's not like I know that you, Harley, are on my website right now doing such and such. I know a visitor is on my website doing such and such. But understanding how users feel or respond to what we're presenting is just so helpful, because we want to give visitors what they want, right? Because we want to make them feel good. And then obviously we want to make money at the end of the day by making them feel good about what we do as opposed to what our competitors do.
Well, you mentioned all this information, the data that comes from analytics, and I'm sure a lot of people listening might feel overwhelmed by thinking about website data analytics. What's the first thing they should look for that actually moves the needle when considering the analytics?
So, when I work with clients, what I like to say is, you don't have to look at your analytics at all. Well, if you can find somebody like myself who can help you with it. But the really key thing that you, the business owner, have to do is you have to know what you want to be going on with your website. So your website is going to be trying to do a number of things. And some of those are obvious, like, if you're selling on your site, then obviously you want to sell stuff. But if you're not selling directly on your site is still there for a purpose. And that purpose may be to establish your authority or your credibility, which means that you, as I said, you have videos or you have podcasts, right? And you want to know, are people watching those? People don't necessarily realize this, but a lot of time, for example, somebody will start watching a video and it won't grab them and they stop. So if you've got lots of videos on your website, but most people are only watching the first, 15, 20 seconds, that's not helping you if the key content is further into the video. So as the business owner, what I want you to be able to do is to show me all of the outcomes that you want your site to do. Maybe you're trying to grow your email list, right? So you've got various places where people can subscribe to your newsletter. So this is not getting technical at all. This is, what are the business outcomes that you want? Are you generating leads? It might be not selling, it might be a support as well. If you sell something technical, maybe you have a support area of your site. where you've got frequently asked questions, or you've got a chatbot where people can ask questions and that kind of stuff. So whatever your website is designed to do, you want to really understand that, because then we can say, great, and is it doing it? If we don't understand what it's trying to do in the first place, then we can't ever answer that question. And there's absolutely no point in just looking at numbers for the sake of looking at the numbers, because it's not going to tell you anything. My favorite question as a consultant often is, so what? Okay, so you got X number of visitors this week. So what? Is that good? Is that bad? We don't know that unless we know other things, like not only is that more than last week, because again, that might not be good. If they're the wrong kind of visitor, that doesn't help you. So were they the right kind of visitor? Do the things you wanted them to do.
Yeah.
So understanding the strategy behind your site, which you as the business owner should do, is the most important thing, because then you can bring in somebody, or you can even these days, Google Analytics has a lot of AI being built into it, and it will answer some pretty basic questions for you as well.
And one thing you talk about are hidden gems in web analytics. What are some of the surprising insights that businesses often overlook?
So one of the cool things about analytics is that once you've sorted out the basic stuff, as I said, like, is it doing the things that you know you want it to do? You can then get in and start saying, okay, what else could I discover? So for example, one of my favorite stories or examples, if you have a lot of content on your site, then you should have a search engine. Content, or, things that people can buy, different items like an inventory, right? You should have a search engine. That's a search engine that's actually on your site, not sort of Google outside of your site. And you can track the searches that people put into that search engine that's on your site. And that is a fantastic source of marketing research, because it tells you all sorts of things. One, it tells you what words people use to describe what they expect to find at the site. And especially if you're in an industry where there's a lot of technical jargon, then you really need to understand whether or not the people that are coming to your website understand your jargon, because they won't always. And that means that you have to have at least some content that's in kind of plain English, or whatever your language is, right? That really helps you create content, right? And it helps you with things like SEO and so on. But another thing that I've used with clients is that you can see where people are entering searches for something that is within your area of expertise, like a new product or a service, or, a new ebook or something like that, but that you don't currently offer. Because then you've got new ideas for, hey, yeah, we could do that. And I've actually done that with clients, and we've created new products or services, and sometimes even new target markets. If you notice a lot of people coming in, you can see where they come from geographically, or you can see the kinds of people that come in. So maybe you can create something just for that particular set of visitors. When I say hidden gems, that's what I'm referring to, is starting to go beyond the basic what's happening to and what else could happen. The other thing that you can do is find all your leaks. So, places where people are leaving when they shouldn't, or not doing the outcomes that you want. One of those, the big things to look for is what we call in marketing calls to action, which is when you ask them for whatever it is you want them to do. You've got to tell people what you want them to do, because otherwise they won't figure it out necessarily. So, for example, blogs are a fantastic example of this. You can have a really good blog posting and people get very interested, and then at the end of it, it just stops, or it says when the author is, and so whatever, right? What do you want people to do as a result of seeing that blog posting or that video or whatever it might be, or listening to this podcast, right? So always think about, what's the next step that I want the visitor to take? Because then we can jump in and say, are they taking it, or are we missing an opportunity to further engage with them, or maybe to really lead them towards an outcome?
That's so smart, using the data you already have from your potential client list or existing clients. I love how people can use that to make new products or services or target it. That is really innovative. Thank you for sharing that tip. And on the flip side, though, what are some of the biggest mistakes that leaders might make when they're trying to use the analytics data to guide their business strategy?
Well, something that a lot of analysts will tell you is that sometimes business leaders have really unrealistic expectations of what analytics can do, because there are constraints. I mean, one is that you have to understand that because of privacy rules, whatever numbers you've got in your analytics don't represent the entirety of your visitors, because some people will not be tracked. If you offer them the opportunity not to be tracked, they'll say yes. Some browsers will block tracking and so on. So you have to understand that what you're looking at is a sample of your visitors. It's not auditable numbers. And that means that your analytics should never be your tool of record. Like for your sales or whatever it is, Whatever your back-end CRM system is should be completely accurate, obviously, but your analytics should not be. And often analysts get asked, can you please explain, or, I'm going crazy because the number of sales I've got in my CRM don't match the number in the analytics. Why not? And it's just not worth worrying about. Different tools will measure things different ways. They'll say the Google Ads doesn't match with the Google Analytics, and, or they'll update data at different times. So trying to reconcile numbers between two different tools, obviously, if they're completely different and it doesn't make sense, then maybe the data is wrong in some place and you need to look at that. But in general, that kind of question is typically not helpful.
Every day, your top performers are buried under emails, scheduling, and reporting. Work that doesn't move the needle. The result? Frustration, burnout, and worst of all, lost revenue. That's why we created the Executive's Guide to Scaling High Performers, a simple, battle-tested framework to eliminate busy work and unlock your team's full potential. Inside, you'll get the exact steps top executives use to retain A players, boost productivity, and free up their team for high-impact work. Stop losing revenue. Go to workergenics.com/growthhub or check the episode notes to download the Executive's Guide to Scaling High Performers now. Now, I'm sure there's been some changes with all the different AI tools out there using crawlers and things like that. How have analytics evolved or changed, and how might someone need to interpret them differently, given there are all these different kinds of crawlers and potential traffic on the website that could be affecting the analytics in different ways?
Yeah, so I mean, as I mostly work with Google Analytics. So, for example, now we're just starting to see traffic sources from AI being accounted for in the analytics, because one of the things you can tell is, how did people get to my site? We're used to seeing traffic coming in from a search engine or from social media or from your email list or whatever, but now we're also starting to see where people are coming in from AI, which is quite interesting. And as I mentioned earlier, these days also, if you log in, often you'll get an AI thing that will say, oh, look, you got a peak of visitors on such and such a day, or I see this anomaly, or whatever it might be, which is helpful. It can be, it may not be. There may be, yes, I got a peak of visitors this day because I sent out my newsletter this day. So, thank you. I'm not that interested. AI can also do some of the stuff that I hate doing, like making pretty charts and graphs much more quickly than I can. So far, hopefully the limitation of it, which means that I still have a job or a meaningful role, is beyond that, the whole, so what can I do about this? That creative part that I mentioned earlier, where we've created a new product or service, or completely reject the content, or something like that. I don't know that the AI can yet really do that effectively for an individual business within the context of that business. So it's really like a really great intern. Well, no, maybe more than that, but yeah.
Awesome. Well, how do you recommend people start integrating web analytics into their broader business planning and discussions?
Yeah, I mean, it should completely be part of your strategy, because your website, your marketing is part of your strategy. On the more sophisticated side, for example, analytics now, and again, another use of AI is to do what we call predictive analytics. So, for example, if you're selling stuff, if you have an e-commerce site, it can start saying what kind of inventory you might be likely to sell in the next time period or so on, and that will inform your operations and your fulfillment and all that kind of thing. So really understanding what's going on with your business and putting that into the context of where you want to go. So you're both using analytics to evaluate whether what you want to happen is working, and also to inform where you could go in the future. So it really should be an integral part of your strategy and your planning on an ongoing basis.
As companies are growing and they're getting more and more analytic data, someone can feel like they're just getting buried in these metrics. When does it make sense to delegate and hand off these analysis tasks to someone like you, or maybe part of it to an assistant or something like that?
Well, firstly, I should say you really don't want to measure everything you can. I mean, people can drown in data, and there's no point to that. You really only want to measure metrics that you can do something about, that are answering a question that you have, where you see a problem that you want to solve. You really don't want to look at every single possible thing, because you'll just it's overwhelming, as you said. And also, if you see an issue that you want to resolve, you're going to have to figure out what the solution is. And again, hopefully somebody like me can make suggestions on that. But then you're going to need to test it, because somebody like me might be wrong, or, our best guess can be wrong. So we need to test So for example, moving a call to action solves the problem that people aren't seeing it and aren't acting on it. So then if you're following a bazillion different metrics at once, or you're changing a different things at once, right? You don't know what you've done that impacts that one thing that you're trying to evaluate. So it's better to have a few metrics that represent current priorities and work with them than try to do 15 different things at once.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, you've taught at business schools and consulted internationally. What's one mindset shift that consistently helps leaders become more data driven?
Letting the data speak for itself. I can't tell you how many, politics is still, people are people, right? And politics is still incredibly prevalent, unfortunately, in our working lives. You get people where the Avinash Kaushik, who's one of my mentors, a very well-known person in analytics, has this thing that he calls the HIPPO. And a HIPPO, it stands for highest paid person's opinion. And sometimes the person in charge may not be the best person to make the decision based on their current level of knowledge. And they need to listen to people who are junior to them to make the right decision. And sometimes they don't want to do that for whatever reason. And I always recommend in those cases that, if you show them the data that says, if we don't do something about this, here's potentially the amount of money that we're losing. And that's where, you can make the difference. You can persuade people. So allowing the data, assuming that obviously you set it up right, to inform you is actually a mind shift that still is important.
What kind of frequency or like intervals do you recommend people even start looking at their data? Is this something that a business leader should be looking at every single day, the analytics from their website? Is this a monthly, quarterly? What kind of cadence do you feel is optimal?
So it depends on what you're doing. I mean, obviously, if you're making big changes, you're launching new products, you're running advertising. Advertising is certainly an area where if you don't have all the money in the world to throw at it, if you want to know if it's effective, you need to monitor it closely. For example, social media advertising, often, if people actually look at the outcomes from the visitors that come from social media, often it can be disappointing. It's not as effective as you might like. You want to really hone in on that. If everything's humming along and everything's working well, maybe you don't need to look at it that often. It depends on what's going on.
Yeah, I've heard stories. I think it was in the news where like some advertising system like was getting sued because like the analytics on the client's website didn't match up with like the reporting that the ad company was saying, and they were kind of claiming traffic went to their website that didn't. And so having those analytics really can help a business, especially if they're making that investment in advertising, like you said, know that they're getting their money's worth. So that's a great advice there. So for someone who's listening now and maybe underutilizing their website, what's one simple action they can take this week to turn it into a better growth tool?
I do think that a lot of businesses are either not using analytics at all or are not using them effectively. So if you're not using them at all, get some analytics on your website, because if you're not using them at all, honestly, you're just completely flying blind with everything you're doing. Honestly, you have no idea how your website's paying off, how many people are coming to it, whether they're the right kinds of people, whether the resources that you're putting into it are worth it, where you're losing money that you could be making, etc. And if you do have analytics, then, are you using it to answer good questions? Don't just let it kind of run and sort of take a look at the number of visitors that came in. And if that's going up, then say everything's working well and go away. Be effective with it. Like I said, you don't have to measure everything, but just make a list of a few current important priorities and work on those.
That is some great advice, excellent strategic tips that you've shared with us today, Philippa. If people want to continue the conversation with you and learn more about your book, what's the best way for them to connect?
So my book is called Website Wealth, as you said, a business leader's guide to driving real value through your analytics. And it is like this conversation that we're having. My goal was to write a book for business leaders which explains what analytics can do for you, but also what you need to think about. But there's no techie jargon in it. There's no charts. It's not a training manual for any particular program. So it's got lots of stories and ideas and examples that designed to inspire you. My website is called Websites That Win, websitesthatwin.com. And I'm always happy to connect with people on LinkedIn.
Well, thank you again. We'll make sure to have all those links in the show notes. And for those of you listening, if you got value from this episode, do one quick thing. Hit the like and subscribe so you don't miss future strategies to help you scale smarter. And maybe you know a business owner or colleague who could use this information. Share this episode with them. It could be exactly what they need right now. And if you're listening on a podcast platform, leave us a quick rating. It helps us reach more business leaders like you. And again, thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you on the next one.